My name's Colton Merrick, and for most of my marriage, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. At least, that's what I told myself when I ignored the late nights, the business trips that stretched longer than planned, and that it's just a friend text messages from unfamiliar names. The night everything cracked open wasn't a night I expected anything but pride. It was a Friday. My wife, Mallory, had just landed a huge account at her company, a boutique marketing firm in the heart of Charleston. Her boss decided to throw a private celebration at a historic mansion they rented for the evening. High ceilings, grand staircases, and chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a museum. Mallory insisted I come. "You have to meet everyone. You've been my rock through all this," she said, flashing that bright, persuasive smile that once could have talked me into anything. I stood near the open bar, nursing a bourbon, watching as she floated through the room like she owned it. Everyone adored her, the men, the women, even the caterers. I didn't mind. I loved seeing her shine. That's when a man I'd never met, with slick back hair and a tie too tight for his smug face, sauntered over. His name was Seth Bramble. Apparently, he was a senior strategist at her firm, and from the way he leaned in close to Mallory whenever he spoke, it was clear he considered himself more. At first, I played it cool. I shook his hand, forced a smile. But then came the moment that made the air go cold. During the toast, when the champagne glasses clinked and the attention turned to Mallory, Seth raised his glass and said, loud and clear, "To Mallory, for proving that some women really can have it all. A brilliant career, and a man patient enough to stay out of her way while she does the real work." Laughter rippled through the crowd. But it wasn't the kind of laughter you want to hear. It was sharp, mocking. Mallory laughed too easily, brushing Seth's arm like it was just harmless fun. And in that moment, standing under a glittering chandelier in a room full of people who didn't even realize they were burying me alive, something inside me shifted. I didn't explode. I didn't make a scene. I simply watched. I watched the way Seth looked at her when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I watched the way Mallory leaned in a little closer than necessary. I watched the way their eyes met like they shared a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I realized then that I wasn't crazy for doubting her all those nights I sat alone at home while she stayed late at work. I realized that sometimes the most dangerous betrayal doesn't come with screaming and broken dishes. It comes quietly, hidden behind champagne toasts and practiced smiles. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the clueless husband in the background. If they thought they were clever, I was about to show them that some games end differently than expected. Because while Seth was busy making toasts and Mallory was busy keeping secrets, I was already laying the groundwork to make them both regret ever underestimating me. And trust me, regret was only the beginning. The ride home from the celebration was suffocating. Mallory sat in the passenger seat scrolling through her phone, laughing at something she wasn't showing me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening under the dim dashboard light. Every now and then, she would glance at me, offer a distracted smile, and say things like, "You were a hit tonight," or "Everyone thought you were hilarious." But it all felt rehearsed, like a script she was tired of pretending to care about. When we pulled into the driveway, she leaned over, pecked my cheek, and disappeared inside without waiting for me. I sat there for a long moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, feeling like I was a guest in my own life. Inside, the house was spotless, cold, too quiet. Mallory had already disappeared upstairs, probably answering Seth's text under the guise of wrapping up work emails. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to confront her with no proof. I was smarter than that. Instead, I got to work. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I would have once dismissed. Her new perfume, a heavy and sweet, something she never wore for me. The locked phone screen whenever I entered the room. The sudden insistence on private strategy meetings at odd hours. But what really grabbed my attention was the way she started treating me, not with anger or distance, but with a kind of polite indifference. As if I were some well-meaning neighbor she no longer had the energy to impress. I decided to test a theory. One night, I told her I had booked us a weekend getaway. Just the two of us. A quiet cabin in the mountains, no phones, no work, no distractions. Her smile froze on her face for half a second too long before she said, "That sounds amazing, but this isn't a good time at work." I nodded, playing along. But inside, something steeled. If work was such a priority, why was she smiling at her phone late at night like a teenager texting her crush? Why did the so-called strategy meetings now involve weekends? I wasn't about to play the fool. Not anymore. I contacted an old friend of mine, Trent, a guy who used to run low-level security setups but had a knack for digital footprints. Within hours, he rigged a discreet tracker on Mallory's car, something so small she'd never notice. He showed me how to monitor her location from an app that looked like a regular weather service. For the next 2 weeks, I said nothing. I smiled when she said she was working late. I kissed her forehead when she claimed she was too tired for a dinner date. And I watched the little blue dot on my phone drift to places that had nothing to do with her office. Restaurants on the other side of town. Private residences tucked away in gated neighborhoods. Hotels. Hotels. One night, a Tuesday, when she said she was pulling an all-nighter with the team, I watched her location settle at a boutique hotel downtown, nowhere near her office. I didn't call. I didn't text. I simply sat there, staring at the screen, feeling nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a cold, mechanical clarity. They thought they were clever. They thought they could play me for a fool. But they forgot something crucial. I wasn't the man who sat quietly at the back of the room anymore. I wasn't the man who swallowed every excuse and clapped at every hollow achievement. I was the man who was about to flip the script. And when I was done, Seth Bramble and my so-called wife would know exactly how it felt to be humiliated. Not with screaming, not with fists, but with precision, with patience, and with a vengeance so polite they wouldn't even see it coming, until it was far too late. The next morning, Mallory acted as if everything was perfectly normal. She kissed me goodbye, mentioned something about an important lunch meeting, and disappeared in a flurry of high heels and expensive perfume. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the clock tick, my mind already racing through the plan I had been crafting for days. I wasn't going to confront her directly. That would be too easy for her to twist, to deny. No, I needed undeniable proof. Not just for myself, but for what was coming next. I called Trent again and told him I needed a favor bigger this time. Cameras. Recordings. Evidence that couldn't be explained away. Within a day, we had a setup, a discreet camera disguised as a phone charger placed inside her car, another tiny device sewn into the lining of her work bag. Technology, as it turns out, has a way of stripping away every layer of a lie. I didn't have to wait long. That Friday night, Mallory claimed she was attending a team-building event. I nodded, handed her her bag, kissed her cheek, and told her to have fun. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I opened the app Trent had installed for me. The screen split into 2 feeds, one from the car, one from her bag, both transmitting live. At first, it was innocent enough. She drove downtown, parked near a sleek cocktail lounge, and met up with a group of coworkers. I watched her hug a few women, and then, Seth. A long, lingering hug, the kind you don't give to someone who's just a colleague. I kept watching as the night wore on. Drinks flowed. Laughter echoed. But something about their body language told me everything I needed to know. Then, right around midnight, the feed from her bag caught something that changed everything. In the back booth of the lounge, Seth slid into the seat beside her instead of across from her. He whispered something into her ear. She laughed, that same breathy, flirty laugh she used to save for me. Then she leaned in and kissed him. Not a peck. Not a joke. A real kiss. Deep. Familiar. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen flickering in the dark kitchen, feeling strangely detached from the scene unfolding. This wasn't some misunderstanding. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a full-blown affair. And worse, they didn't even seem worried about hiding it. I could have exploded right then. Driven downtown. Caused a scene. Shouted for the world to see what kind of people they really were. But that's what they expected. That's what fools do. Instead, I smiled. Because they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. You see, I had been quiet long enough. I had played the devoted husband, the supportive nobody for years. Now it was time for Colton Merrick to remind them that even the quietest man in the room holds power when he knows the truth. And I was going to dismantle them, piece by piece, without ever raising my voice. Without ever breaking a single rule. All I needed was one final move. The perfect, devastating move. And it was already in motion. The next morning, I moved quietly through the house as if nothing had happened. Mallory was already up, humming in the kitchen, making herself coffee like a woman without a single secret in the world. It was almost impressive how well she could pretend. Almost. I watched her from across the room, sipping my own coffee, letting her performance wash over me. I didn't flinch when she kissed my cheek or when she said she might have to work through the weekend again. I simply nodded and smiled, the perfect husband she thought she had broken. By noon, she was gone again, and I got to work on the final piece of my plan. I composed a carefully worded email. It was polite, enthusiastic even, inviting Mallory's entire firm, including Seth, to a special appreciation dinner at a newly opened restaurant downtown. An anonymous donor, I wrote, wanted to celebrate the firm's recent successes. No one would be charged for the event, and there would be gifts for the most outstanding employees. Of course, the donor insisted everyone must bring their significant other. It was mandatory, a way to honor the support systems behind their success. It took less than an hour for the RSVP emails to flood in, including Mallory's, including Seth's. They were trapped, and they didn't even know it yet. I spent the next few days preparing everything. I worked with Trent to set up a private back room in the restaurant, outfitted discreetly with hidden cameras and a live feed directly to my laptop. I coordinated with the manager, offering him a generous tip to reserve the space without asking questions. Every detail was perfect. When Friday evening rolled around, Mallory was radiant. She wore a new dress I hadn't seen before, short, tight, shimmering. She spent nearly an hour in front of the mirror, perfecting her makeup, spritzing herself with the same perfume I had smelled in the car that night at the hotel. She was buzzing with excitement, assuming she was walking into another night of being celebrated, admired, maybe even secretly stealing glances with Seth behind my back. If she only knew. We arrived at the restaurant a little early. I played the part again, holding her hand, complimenting her, smiling at all the right moments. She didn't suspect a thing. Seth showed up moments later, walking through the door like he owned the place, a smug little grin plastered across his face. His date? None. Typical. Throughout the evening, I watched as Mallory's attention drifted away from me and towards Seth, their stolen glances and secret smiles becoming more obvious with every glass of wine. They thought they were clever. They thought they had the world fooled. When dessert was served, I tapped my glass with a fork and stood up. The room fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, smiling warmly. Thank you for coming tonight. I wanted to take a moment to truly honor those who embody loyalty, dedication, and integrity, both at work and at home. I looked directly at Mallory, then at Seth, and then, without a flicker of hesitation, I clicked a small remote in my pocket. The wall behind me, previously appearing like nothing more than elegant paneling, lit up. A large hidden screen descended, and the room gasped as the footage began to play. Clear as day, Mallory and Seth. In the lounge. In the car. At the hotel. Laughing. Whispering. Kissing. All of it captured in perfect, damning clarity. The silence was electric. Mallory's face went pale. Seth's jaw hung open. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the whispers started. The gasps. The sideways glances. And I stood there, calm and steady, as the illusion of their little world shattered around them. Mallory opened her mouth as if to explain, to lie, to beg, but no sound came out. Seth looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. I placed the remote on the table, smiled wider than I had in months, and said, "Thank you all for being witnesses. Have a wonderful evening." And then, without raising my voice, without throwing a single punch, without even slamming a door, I walked out, head held high, free at last. But trust me, this was only the beginning of their nightmare. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I half expected to hear footsteps pounding behind me, to hear Mallory screaming my name, chasing me down the sidewalk with excuses and half-baked apologies. But the night stayed eerily silent. I didn't even glance back. I slid into my truck, started the engine, and drove away without looking once into the rearview mirror. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at an old fishing cabin my grandfather had left me, a place so deep in the woods that the only company was the wind against the trees. I needed silence to think, to breathe, to remind myself that what I had done wasn't revenge, it was revelation. I hadn't humiliated her. I hadn't destroyed her life. She had done that all by herself. I simply turned on the lights. The messages started flooding in not long after. At first, they were desperate, Mallory's name flashing across my screen again and again. "Colton, please, just talk to me. You don't understand. It's not what it looked like. We were just drunk. It didn't mean anything." Lie after lie after lie, piling up like debris in a broken dam. Then came the voicemails. Tears. Sobs. Promises. "I made a mistake. I love you, not him. Please don't throw everything away over one stupid mistake." But it wasn't one mistake. It was 1,000 tiny betrayals stacked on top of each other, and only now, when the tower finally collapsed, did she notice the wreckage. By Sunday afternoon, the messages changed tone. Anger seeped in. Accusations. "You humiliated me. You made a fool out of both of us. How could you be so cold, so heartless? You'll regret this. Colton, you'll see. No, Mallory. I wouldn't regret a thing. Because for the first time in years, I had clarity. Word about the dinner spread through her office like wildfire. By Monday morning, the company's HR department had launched an internal investigation. Seth was suspended pending review. Mallory was summoned for a serious discussion about workplace conduct. Her polished career, the one she had so carefully curated, was now bleeding out in broad daylight. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't say a word. I simply watched as consequences, real, brutal, and deserved, came crashing down. But I wasn't done yet. Because Mallory wasn't the only one who owed me answers. There was another player in this little tragedy, a name I kept seeing pop up in her texts, someone she always described as just a friend, someone from accounting, someone harmless. I hadn't paid much attention to him before. But now, I was curious. And curiosity, when guided by cold precision, is a powerful weapon. I pulled up the tracker app again, not on Mallory's car this time, but on another vehicle Trent had helped me tag weeks ago, just in case. Seth's. And what I saw made my blood run cold, then boil all over again. Because Seth wasn't meeting Mallory at the hotel anymore. No. Now he was meeting someone else. Someone I knew all too well. Someone I never would have expected. The betrayal was even bigger than I had imagined. The web was tangled deeper than I ever thought possible. And I was about to tear every last strand apart. This wasn't just a personal betrayal anymore. This was war. And the next move? It would leave them both wishing they had never crossed a man like me. The next morning, after a sleepless night filled with thoughts sharper than broken glass, I sat on the porch of the cabin with a steaming cup of black coffee, staring at the tracker on my phone. Seth's vehicle was parked at an address I recognized all too well, a suburban townhouse not far from the city, in a neighborhood where the houses all looked the same but the secrets hiding inside were anything but. The address belonged to Abigail Turner, one of Mallory's oldest friends, the woman who had stood beside her at our wedding, the woman I had trusted like family. At first, I tried to make excuses in my head. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe Seth was seeing someone who just happened to live there. Maybe Abigail didn't know. But the knot in my gut said otherwise. I wasn't the type to ignore my instincts anymore. Not after everything I had seen, everything I had survived. I drove into town, taking the long way around to give myself time to think. I parked a block away and approached the townhouse on foot, keeping to the shadows like some specter they had forgotten existed. It was late afternoon, and the curtains were drawn, but a car in the driveway, Abigail's, confirmed what I already suspected. I didn't need to force my way inside. I didn't need to create a scene. I simply waited. And sure enough, within an hour, the front door cracked open. There was Abigail, laughing, holding a bottle of wine in one hand. And there was Seth, right behind her, his hand on her waist, leaning in to kiss her like they'd been doing it for years. It hit me harder than I thought it would, not because I still loved Mallory or cared about Seth or Abigail, but because it confirmed something much deeper, much uglier. It wasn't just one betrayal. It was betrayal stacked on betrayal, a whole network of deceit so tangled and poisonous that it had touched every part of my life without me even noticing. Abigail knew about Seth and Mallory. She had helped cover it up. And now, she had become part of the same rotten cycle. I snapped a few photos from my vantage point. Clean. Clear. Undeniable. Not because I needed more proof, but because I needed them to know that from now on, I would see everything. No more illusions. No more trusting the wrong people. When I got back to the cabin, I drafted 2 letters. One for Mallory. One for Abigail. In Mallory's, I laid everything bare. I told her I knew everything, not just about her and Seth, but about the lies she had spun for years. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply laid out the facts, cold and brutal like the edge of a blade. At the end, I wrote one line. When you build a life out of lies, don't be surprised when it collapses on you. In Abigail's letter, I was even shorter. Loyalty isn't tested when everything's easy. It's tested when temptation knocks. You failed. I mailed both letters without a return address. No calls. No warnings. No explanations. Let them wonder. Let them tear each other apart with suspicion and guilt. Meanwhile, I met with my lawyer. Quietly, carefully, I filed for divorce, citing infidelity with overwhelming evidence attached to the documents. In our state, that meant the division of assets would favor me heavily. I would keep the house, most of our savings, and a large chunk of her retirement account, the very empire she had thought she was building behind my back. In less than 2 months, Mallory would lose everything she thought she had secured. Not because I hated her. Not because I wanted revenge. but because I was done pretending that I owed her anything but the cold, hard consequences she had earned. And as for Seth and Abigail, their little affair would implode long before then. People like them can't survive without a target. And now, with no one left to fool, they would turn on each other faster than wolves trapped in the same cage. I didn't need to watch it happen. I didn't need to be there to see the wreckage. I had already won simply by walking away, free, clear, and stronger than they ever imagined. And that was a kind of victory no public humiliation could ever touch. The divorce papers were sent through the proper channels. Mallory was served while she was at work, standing in the middle of an open office where everyone could see the official packet land in her hands. Trent, ever the resourceful friend, made sure I got a glimpse of her reaction. She stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, cheeks blazing red as her coworkers tried not to stare. The woman who had spent years carefully building a perfect image was now crumbling from the inside out, and no carefully curated smile could save her this time. I stayed silent. I didn't text. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't respond to the long, rambling emails filled with half-truths and desperate justifications. I wasn't cruel. I didn't mock her. I simply refused to engage. In the meantime, the internal investigation at her firm wrapped up. The conclusion was brutal: violation of professional conduct, undisclosed relationships compromising project integrity, misuse of company resources. Mallory was asked to resign quietly or face public termination. Seth wasn't offered that courtesy. He was fired on the spot, escorted out of the building like a disgraced politician caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And then the final blow came, not from me, but from reality itself. The photos of Seth and Abigail made their way into the public sphere quietly, almost accidentally. An anonymous email blast to select employees at Mallory's company attached the images without comment. No accusations. No long-winded explanations. Just the cold evidence. It didn't take long before rumors spread like wildfire. Not just about Seth and Abigail, but about the entire tangled web Mallory had been spinning behind the scenes. Her carefully manicured reputation wasn't just bruised. It was obliterated. I heard about all this from Trent, from old mutual friends, from the whispers that somehow found their way back to me. I didn't need to see it for myself. The satisfaction wasn't in their suffering, it was in my freedom. It was in the silence of my own life, now free of lies, of manipulation, of the constant gnawing doubt that used to keep me awake at night. The last time Mallory tried to reach me was through a handwritten letter delivered to my lawyer's office. The handwriting was shaky. The letter was filled with memories: our first date, our first apartment, the vacations we took when we were still young and in love. She apologized. She begged. She asked if there was any piece of my heart left that could forgive her, that could rebuild what she had destroyed. I sat on my back porch that night, reading the letter under the soft orange glow of the porch light. The same porch where we once dreamed about the future. The same porch where I used to wait for her when she stayed out late working. I folded the letter neatly and tossed it into the fire pit. I watched as the flames consumed the paper, the words, the lies, the memories. And as the embers floated up into the night sky, I realized something powerful. Forgiveness isn't always about letting someone back into your life. Sometimes, it's about letting yourself move forward without the weight of their betrayal chaining you to the past. Mallory would live with her choices. Seth would live with his disgrace. Abigail would live with her shame. And me? I would live free. No longer second-guessing myself. No longer doubting my worth. No longer waiting for loyalty from people who never understood its value in the first place. Somewhere deep down, I think they all expected me to break, to lash out, to implode. Instead, I simply walked away. And in doing so, I became something they could never touch again. Untouchable. The months that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. For the first time in years, I woke up without that heavy feeling in my chest, without the need to brace myself for another disappointment, another lie, another excuse. The house was quieter, sure, but it wasn't the kind of silence that suffocates. It was the kind that heals. I spent my mornings out on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, listening to the wind through the trees instead of the buzzing of unanswered texts. I dusted off old hobbies I had forgotten in the chaos of trying to hold up a one-sided marriage. I bought a second-hand boat and spent weekends fishing, feeling the kind of peace that can't be faked or forced. Slowly, friends who had drifted away over the years started to come back into my life. Not out of pity, but because they saw the difference in me. The walls I had built during my marriage weren't necessary anymore. I didn't have to pretend to be fine or shrink myself down to fit someone else's expectations. I could finally just be me. Professionally, things took a surprising turn too. An old colleague, hearing that I was single and focusing on myself, offered me a job opportunity that I never would have considered before. It was a new role in a new city, a chance to rebuild from the ground up without the shadows of the past following me. And so, 6 months after the night, everything collapsed. I packed up the few things I truly cared about and moved across the country to a coastal town where the air smelled like salt and possibility. I found a modest house with a wide porch and a view of the ocean, the kind of place that feels like it belongs to you the moment you step inside. Life didn't magically become perfect. There were hard days, days when the past knocked on the door of my mind, asking to be remembered. But I didn't let it in. I had learned too much. I had fought too hard for my peace. One evening, as the sun sank into the water and painted the sky in fire and gold, I sat on the beach with a book in my hand and realized something simple but profound. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed is the only way to find what you truly deserve. Mallory, Seth, Abigail, they were chapters in my story, but they weren't the whole book. They were lessons. Necessary, painful, but ultimately freeing. I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. I was alive, wide awake, stronger than ever. And as the waves whispered against the shore, I smiled, not because of what I had lost, but because of what I had finally found. Myself.